The hall was enormous. It could hold 10,000 people and still feel empty. The walls curved upward like the inside of a shell, and the lights came from everywhere and nowhere at the same time. The seats rose in wide circles around a central floor, and every seat was filled. 34 species, hundreds of delegates, thousands of eyes, some with lids, some without, some glowing faintly in the dark upper rows. And in the middle of all of it, one human sat alone at a small rectangular table. His name was Junho. He was 44 years old. He had short black hair going gray at the sides, and he wore a plain dark suit with no medals and no decorations. He had a glass of water in front of him that he had not touched in 2 hours. He sat very still, with his hands flat on the table, and he watched the vote happen in real time on the screen above the central floor. The numbers moved quickly, green lights for yes, red lights for no. One by one the species voted. The Vreth Dominion green, the Oculari Collective green, the Syndicate of Pale Hands green. The smaller species followed, most of them green, a few abstaining. Nobody voted red, nobody even hesitated. Resolution 7 Omega passed with 31 votes in favor. The 2 outer colony systems that Earth had built over 60 years, Heian Station and the Doru Belt settlements, were no longer Earth's. They now belonged to the Council's Territorial Alignment Committee, which was a name that meant nothing and could be used to mean anything. Junho did not move. He did not speak. He did not write anything down. He just looked at the screen until the vote disappeared and the next agenda item appeared. Around him, the other delegates shuffled papers and spoke quietly to each other. A few of them glanced at him. Most did not. A small alien aide approached the table and placed a printed summary of the resolution in front of him. It was the same information he had already seen on the screen. The aide left without saying anything. Junho looked at the paper for a moment, then set it aside. He had been sitting in this hall, on and off, for 11 years. 11 years of provisional membership. 11 years of attending sessions with no vote, no veto, no real voice. He had filed 214 formal objections during those 11 years. He knew the exact number because Nara kept the records. Every objection had been received, stamped, assigned a reference number, and quietly buried. The reasons the Council gave for keeping Earth in provisional status were always the same. Humans were too emotional. Humans had a long history of war. Humans were biologically unpredictable. These were the words used in official documents. In the informal conversations in the hallways and side rooms, the words were less careful. Junho had heard them all. He had written them down too. He stood up, gathered nothing because he had brought nothing, and walked out of the hall. Back on Earth, in a building in the middle of a city that never fully went quiet, Secretary General Diho was watching the vote on a wall screen. He was a big man, heavy through the shoulders, with a wide face and tired eyes. He had not slept well in 3 days. He watched the numbers move, watched the green lights add up, and did not react when the final count appeared. Across the long table, a woman named Sora sat with a tablet in her hands and said nothing. She was younger than Diho by about 12 years, with close-cropped hair and the calm expression of someone who had already made peace with what was coming. She had been working in strategic intelligence for 15 years. She had spent the last 7 of those years preparing for this moment. When the vote finished, she slid a single sheet of paper across the table to Diho. He read it without picking it up. His eyes moved across the lines slowly. The paper said that Resolution 7 Omega was not the end. It was part of a pattern. Resolution 9 was already drafted. It would target Earth's trade corridors in the mid-belt regions. Resolution 11 would follow within 18 months and would formally reclassify Earth as a developing civilization, stripping its remaining observer rights. After that, there would be nothing left to protect and no legal ground to stand on. Diho read the paper twice, then he looked up at Sora. "How long have we been preparing the alternative?" he asked. 7 years, she said. He nodded once slowly, like a man finishing a very long thought. "Then it's time," he said. Jun-Ho arrived back at the Earth diplomatic quarters on the station. It was a small set of rooms compared to what the Vreth and the Oculari had there, spread over entire floors with private gardens and staff canteens. Earth's quarters had a meeting room, 4 offices, a kitchen, and a narrow lounge with a window that looked out at the planet below. Nara was waiting for him in the meeting room. She was 38, with sharp eyes and ink on her fingers from writing by hand, a habit she had never lost. She had joined the diplomatic team 9 years ago as a translator and had slowly become the most important person in the building. She knew the Galactic Charter better than anyone alive, including the species who had written it. She was looking at her tablet when Jun-Ho walked in, and she did not say anything about the vote. She already knew. "I got the call from Diho," she said. Jun-Ho sat down across from her. He finally looked tired. Not broken, just tired, the way a person looks after holding something heavy for a very long time. "So we're doing it," he said. "We're doing it," she confirmed. He looked out the window at the curve of the Earth below. Somewhere down there, Sara was already moving pieces into position. Somewhere out in the deep black, Commander Teal was receiving the same message on a different channel. Jun-Ho thought about the 2 colony systems. He thought about the 60 years of work that had built them. He thought about the people who had been born there, grown up there, made lives there. He thought about the vote that had taken all of it away in 40 seconds. He was not angry. He had moved past anger a long time ago. What he felt now was something much colder and much more useful. "How long do we need to get everything in place?" he asked. Nara was already writing. 3 weeks, she said. "Then you go back into that hall one last time." Request came in on a Tuesday morning, station time. A formal application for an emergency address before the full Galactic Council, filed by Ambassador Jun-Ho of Earth. Signed, stamped, and submitted through the correct channels, following every rule, every procedure, every small bureaucratic step that the Council required. The Council approved it the same day. They always approved human requests for the floor. It cost them nothing. The humans would speak, the hall would listen politely, and then things would continue exactly as they had before. It had happened many times. The other species had stopped taking it seriously years ago. That was exactly what Jun-Ho had counted on. The session was called for the 3rd day of the following week. Every delegation was present. The hall was full, the same enormous curved space with rising seats and soft light from everywhere at once. The same 34 species. The same thousands of eyes. Jun-Ho had walked into this room more times than he could count, but this time he did not sit down at the small rectangular table in the center. He stood behind it. He had one sheet of notes, handwritten, which Nara had prepared. He glanced at it once before he stepped to the podium. Then he folded it and put it in his pocket and did not look at it again. The council president, a tall Vreth delegate named Orvin, gave a short introduction. He said that the floor was open to Ambassador Jun-Ho of Earth for a period of 15 minutes. His voice carried the particular boredom of someone who had already decided that nothing interesting was about to happen. Jun-Ho thanked him. He spoke quietly, clearly, without rushing. Then he began. He started with the year Earth had applied for full council membership. He named the date, the session number, and the exact vote count. He named which species had voted against, which had abstained, and what reasons had been recorded in the official minutes. He moved forward through time, year by year, resolution by resolution. He spoke about trade agreements that looked fair on the surface and were not. He talked about clauses, small, technical, buried in subsections, that over time had redirected Earth's resources toward other species development programs without equal return. He talked about the patents, 17 separate human technologies that had been submitted to the Council's Joint Development Office and had disappeared into a review process that never ended. He named the technologies. He named the species that had later filed similar patents under their own names. He talked about the election, the 2271 Earth governmental election that had been won by a coalition that supported stronger ties with the Council. He described, in plain language, how certain communications had been interfered with during that campaign period. He did not use emotional words. He used document numbers, dates, and names. He talked about the colony systems, Hyun Station and the Doru Belt. He talked about the 60 years of human labor that had built them, the families that had lived there, the infrastructure that had been constructed piece by piece. He talked about Resolution 7 Omega and how it had passed in 40 seconds while he sat at a small table and watched. The hall had been quietly busy when he started, the low hum of translation devices, the shuffle of delegates settling in for what they expected to be a routine address. But somewhere in the second minute, the hum began to fade. By the fourth minute, the hall was completely silent, not politely silent, actually silent, the way a room goes quiet when people realize something is wrong. Jun-ho spoke for 6 minutes, not 15, 6. He did not raise his voice once. When he reached the final section of what he had to say, he paused for just a moment, not for drama, just to make sure every translation device in the room had caught up. Then he said it. The United Earth government has reviewed its position within this body. We have reviewed it carefully and at length and with full consideration of every available option. He stopped for half a second. Effective immediately, Earth is withdrawing all diplomatic personnel, all trade liaisons, and all observer delegations from the Galactic Council. Every human representative on this station will depart within 72 hours. Someone in the upper rows made a sound. It was cut off quickly. We are not leaving because we have failed, Jun-ho continued. We are not leaving because we are afraid, or because we are angry, or because we do not understand how this body works. He looked up from the podium and let his eyes move across the room slowly. We are leaving because we no longer require your permission to exist. He reached into his jacket pocket and placed a small black data chip on the top of the podium. He did not explain what it was. He did not point to it. He just set it down flat, as if it were a period at the end of a sentence. Then he stepped back from the podium, turned, and walked toward the exit. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The hall held 34 species, thousands of individuals, and not one of them made a sound. Then the Vreth ambassador, Orvin, stood up and shouted for the doors to be sealed. The doors were already open. Jun-ho walked through them without slowing down. Up in the observation deck above the main chamber, Nara had watched the entire address through a narrow viewport. She was alone up there. She had not wanted company for this part. She watched Jun-ho disappear through the doors. She watched the chamber below break apart, delegates standing, aides rushing in from side entrances, the council president making sharp gestures at staff members who looked confused and helpless. She looked at the black data chip still sitting on the podium. Nobody had touched it yet. A few delegates were staring at it from a distance, as if it might do something on its own. Nara allowed herself a small smile. She had spent 4 years building what was on that chip. 4 years of reading, cataloging, cross-referencing, and documenting every galactic legal record she could access. 4 years of very quiet, very patient work. She picked up her bag, pulled her jacket straight, and headed for the exit. They have no idea what's on that chip, she said quietly, to no one in particular. Then she walked out, and the door closed behind her, and the chaos in the chamber below continued without her. It was a junior aide from the Oculari delegation who finally picked up the chip. His name was not important. He was young, freshly assigned to the station, and he had only been doing this job for 4 months. When the senior delegates had stood around the podium for 20 minutes arguing about whether touching the chip was an act of engagement or an act of provocation, he had simply walked up, picked it up, and inserted it into the nearest reading console. Nobody stopped him because nobody was watching him. They were all watching each other. The screen above the central floor filled with text. It was a document, a very large document. The title was plain and simple. It read, "A full account of violations committed against the United Earth government by member and observer states of the Galactic Council, documented with supporting evidence, reference numbers, and applicable charter citations." Then it said 4,000 pages, all evidence verified, all citations active. The hall went quiet for the second time that day. Sara had built the dossier the way a person builds a wall, one brick at a time, over many years, making sure each piece was solid before adding the next. She had started 7 years ago with a small team of 6 people. By the time it was finished, the team had grown to 41, working across 3 different secure facilities on Earth and one on a station so far out that it did not appear on any council map. They had not hacked anything. They had not stolen anything. Every single document inside the chip had been obtained through legal means, public filings, open records requests, intercepted but legally receivable transmissions, and careful observation of things that other species had simply not bothered to hide well enough because they never thought anyone was watching that closely. The first section of the dossier covered the Vreth Dominion. It laid out in very clear language a private agreement that the Vreth had made with 2 other council powers 9 years ago. The agreement was simple. Any human technology submitted to the Joint Development Office would be placed into an indefinite review process. While it sat in review, the technology would be studied and, where possible, replicated under different names by Vreth-aligned research bodies. The agreement included a payment structure. It included the names of the officials who had signed it. It included the dates of every meeting where the arrangement had been discussed. 17 human technologies, 9 years, all of it documented. The second section covered the Oculari Collective. This section was shorter but harder to read, at least for the Oculari delegates in the room. It contained communication records from the 2271 Earth election period. Specific signals, sent from Oculari-controlled relay stations, targeted at particular regions of Earth's communication network during the final weeks of the campaign. The signals had been designed to suppress certain transmissions and amplify others. The goal had been to shape the outcome of the election toward a result that would keep Earth's government divided and its foreign policy weak. It had partially worked. The coalition that won had been stronger on council alignment than the one that lost, but it had not worked as well as the Oculari had hoped because Earth's population had been angrier than expected, and angry people pay attention. The Oculari ambassador sat very still as the section was read aloud by a council staff member. She did not speak. She did not look at anyone. The third section covered the Syndicate of Pale Hands. This was the one that made several delegates in the upper rows lean forward. The syndicate had always presented itself as a neutral trading body, above politics, interested only in commerce. The dossier showed something different. Over 11 years, the syndicate had been systematically collecting human biomedical research. Some of it purchased through front companies, some of it acquired through data breaches that had been blamed on unrelated criminal groups. The research had then been sold in pieces to smaller civilizations on the outer edges of Council territory, who were willing to pay very high prices for technology that worked. The syndicate had made a great deal of money. None of it had gone to Earth. The fourth section was the one that made the smaller species go very quiet in a different way. It listed 9 council members, not the major powers, but the mid-sized species who had always voted quietly and said little in open sessions. It showed, one by one, the payments and favors each of them had received in exchange for keeping Earth's membership application in permanent provisional status. Some had received trade benefits. Some had received territorial concessions in unrelated disputes. One had received a very large private loan, from a Vreth financial institution at a very favorable rate, timed exactly 2 weeks before a critical membership vote. They had been bought, all 9 of them, and now everyone knew it. Under the Galactic Charter, the same charter the Council had been using to manage Earth for 11 years, the evidence in the dossier was enough to do something very specific. It was enough to legally nullify every resolution passed against Earth that had been influenced by the parties named in the document. Nara had checked this 31 times. Resolution 7 Omega was nullified. Heian Station and the Doru Belt were Earth's again, under Council law, before a single human ship had moved. The smaller species who had stayed silent for years began reading the dossier carefully. 3 of them, before the end of that first day, sent quiet diplomatic messages to Earth's communication office requesting private talks, not through the Council, directly to Earth. Out in the deep black, far from the station and the chaos inside it, Commander Teal received a short message from Sara. It contained 4 words and a set of coordinates. He read it once, passed it to his navigation officer, and said nothing else. The first Unified Defense Fleet began moving. No weapons were charged. No alerts were broadcast. The ship simply moved, slowly and steadily, toward the coordinates of 2 colony systems that legally belonged to Earth again. When a Vreth patrol vessel detected the movement and sent a warning signal, Teal waited a full minute before responding. He wanted to make sure his voice was calm when he did. "We are here to assist with the repatriation of Earth territory," he said. "The legal documents have already been filed. You are welcome to review them at your convenience." He clicked off the channel. In the scanner room, his science officer Yuna looked up from her console. "They're not moving to intercept," she said. "They're just sitting there." Teal looked straight ahead at the viewport. "They're not fighting us," he said. "They're fighting each other." The Galactic Council had not canceled a session in 230 years. It canceled 3 in 1 week. The first was canceled because the Vreth delegation walked out after the Oculari Collective formally accused them of running the patent suppression program alone, without sharing the full benefit with their partners. This was technically true, but the Oculari had said it in open session, in front of everyone, which broke an informal agreement that had held for decades. The Vreth ambassador called it a betrayal. The Oculari ambassador called it a correction of the record. Both of them were shouting by the time the session was closed. The second session was canceled because 4 of the 9 mid-sized species named in the dossier refused to attend until a formal review process was established to address the bribery allegations. They wanted the review to be independent. The Vreth and the Oculari wanted it to be internal. Nobody could agree on what independent meant in this context, and the argument about that became its own separate argument that blocked everything else. The third session was canceled because the council president, the Vreth delegate Orvin, submitted a resignation letter. He cited personal reasons. Nobody believed him, but the letter was accepted and processing began, and without a sitting president the session had no legal chair. In 230 years, the council had never looked like this. Diho was in his office when the report came in about the third cancellation. He was eating a late dinner, something simple from a container, because he had missed the proper meal hours again. Sara was sitting across from him, going through a stack of communications on her tablet. She had barely slept in a week, but she did not look tired. She looked like a person running on something better than sleep. She read the cancellation report out loud. When she finished, Diho set down his container and laughed. It was a short laugh, sudden and genuine, the kind that comes out when something lands in a way you did not quite expect even when you planned for it. Sara looked up from her tablet. She raised an eyebrow. "I knew it would be bad for them," Diho said, shaking his head slightly. "I did not think they would collapse this fast." "They were already cracked," Sara said. "We just pushed." He nodded and picked up his food again. A few moments later, his communications officer appeared in the doorway with a printed message. It had come through the official council channel, marked urgent, addressed directly to Ambassador Junho. Diho read it, he read it again, then he held it out to Sora. It was from the council's emergency mediation office. It asked, in careful and slightly desperate language, whether Ambassador Junho might be available to return to the station in an advisory capacity. The situation had become complex, it said. Earth's experience and perspective would be valuable in helping to stabilize the current proceedings. The Council would be grateful for humanity's continued engagement. Sora finished reading and set the paper down on the desk. "They want us to come back and fix the mess we made," she said. "The mess they made," Diho said. She allowed a small smile. "I'll draft the reply." The reply went out the next morning. It was written in the same formal language the Council always used, polite and precise, without a single sharp word anywhere in it. It said that Ambassador Junho was currently unavailable due to prior commitments. It said that Earth was engaged in a series of independent bilateral negotiations and wished the Council well in its internal review process. It said that Earth would continue to monitor the situation and remained open to future communication, should circumstances change. It did not say what the prior commitments were. It did not name the bilateral negotiations. It did not need to. Those negotiations had been in progress for 3 years, built quietly and carefully by Nara while she had still been sitting in the council station doing the dossier work. She had used the same patience she used for everything. She had identified 14 civilizations, all of them smaller, all of them long-time council members who had felt the weight of the dominant powers for years without saying so publicly. She had talked to them slowly, over time, through informal channels, through academic exchanges, through shared research programs that had started small and grown. She had not asked them to leave the council. She had simply shown them what else was possible. The framework had a name now, the Accord of Open Stars. It was a voluntary structure, no mandatory fees, no permanent seats, no veto powers, no provisional memberships. Every member had one vote. Every session was open. Every decision required genuine majority agreement, not the quiet management of a room by the 3 or 4 species powerful enough to control it. Nara had written the first draft of the founding charter herself, alone in a small room on Earth, in a single long night. Then she had sent it to the 14 delegations and told them to change anything they did not like. They had changed a great deal, and the document had become better for it. By the time Junho had walked out of the council chamber, the Accord already had 17 founding members. Earth was one of them. The other 16 had been waiting for the right moment to make it real. Out at the colony systems, Field Admiral Kisu watched the last of the Vreth ships turn and move away from Hyun Station. It happened slowly, without announcement, without any formal communication. The ships simply stopped holding position, reoriented, and began moving back in the direction they had come from. Kisu had been in service for 30 years. He had been in actual combat twice, and both times it had been short and ugly and nothing like the stories. He had spent most of his career doing exactly this, holding position, watching, waiting, not giving anyone a reason to shoot. He opened a channel to Teal's ship. "They're pulling back," he said. Teal's voice came back after a short pause. "I see it." "That's it, no signal, no statement, nothing." "Nothing," Teal said, "they just left." Kisu watched the last Vreth ship shrink on his screen until it disappeared into the dark. He let out a long, slow breath. "We didn't fire a single shot," he said. "We didn't need to," Teal replied. "We didn't give them anything to shoot at. You can't fight a legal document, Kisu. You can only lose to it." Kisu leaned back in his chair and looked out at Hyun Station through the viewport. The lights were still on. They had always been on. The people inside had kept going, kept working, kept living through all of it, because nobody had told them to stop. He thought that was probably the most human thing of all. 6 months later, it rained in Seoul on the morning of the summit. It was a light rain, the kind that makes the streets shine and the air smell clean. The building where the summit was being held was not the largest in the city, but it had been chosen carefully. It had wide windows, open corridors, and rooms that let in natural light. Nara had picked it herself. She had said that the first meeting of something new should not happen in a place that felt like a fortress. 17 delegations arrived over the course of 2 days. They came from 17 different civilizations, some of them from very far away, some of them small enough that most council members had never bothered to learn their names. They arrived quietly, without large staffs or long convoys. A few of them had never been to Earth before. They stood in the lobby of the building and looked out the windows at the rain and the city and said very little, but their expressions were open in a way that was easy to read across species lines. They were curious, they were hopeful, and under both of those things, very quietly, they were relieved. The sessions began on the 3rd morning. Nara had designed the room the same way she had designed the charter, nothing at the center, every seat equal distance from every other seat, no raised platforms, no special tables for special members. The chairs were arranged in a wide circle. There were translation devices at every seat. There was water, and there were small dishes of food from different worlds, placed in the middle so that anyone could reach them. Junho presided over the opening session, but he had been very clear with Nara beforehand that he did not want to be the center of the room. He sat in the circle like everyone else. When it was his turn to speak, he spoke. When it was not, he listened. The first session ran for 4 hours. Nobody left early. Nobody looked at a communication device. 3 delegates from different species got into a long and detailed disagreement about the wording of one clause in the Charter's 3rd article, and the disagreement went on for 40 minutes and ended with all 3 of them satisfied, and the clause improved. Nara wrote down the new version by hand while they were still talking. By the end of the first day, the founding charter of the Accord of Open Stars had been read aloud in full, debated in parts, amended in 7 places, and signed by all 17 members. It was the fastest founding document in galactic history. Nara knew this because she had looked it up. On the 2nd day, Nara stood at the front of the room and presented the Accord's first joint initiative. It was a deep space mapping program. The goal was to chart a corridor 40 light-years beyond the current edge of explored space, using ships and equipment contributed by multiple member species, with all data shared equally among all members from the first day of the mission. No single species would own the maps. No single species would control the access routes. Everything found would belong to everyone who had done the work. She explained it in simple language, without long technical sections, because she had learned over years of diplomatic work that the best ideas did not need complicated explanations. When she finished, she looked around the room. The reaction was something she had not fully expected, even though she had hoped for it. The delegates were not politely nodding the way delegates nodded in council sessions when they had already decided what they thought and were just waiting for the speaker to finish. They were actually talking to each other, leaning across the circle, pulling up their own maps and data on personal devices, asking questions that were real questions. Nara stood at the front and watched it happen, and felt something she had not felt in a very long time in a room full of diplomats. She felt like the work was going to matter. Diho gave the closing address on the final afternoon. He had written it himself, which was unusual. He normally worked with a speechwriter, but this one he had written alone, late at night in his office after everyone else had gone home. He stood in the circle with the 17 delegations around him and spoke without notes. He did not talk about the old council. He did not say the word victory. He did not speak about what Earth had been through or what had been taken from them or what they had taken back. All of that was real and all of it had happened, but it was not what this room was for. He talked about what came next. He said that humanity had spent a long time asking for a seat at other people's tables. He said that asking had not been weakness, it had been patience, and patience was not nothing. But there came a point where waiting for permission became a choice to stay small, and Earth had decided it was done making that choice. He said that the Accord was not built to replace something or to beat something. It was built because the stars were large, and the work of exploring them was too big for any one species, and too important to be controlled by the few for the benefit of the few. He said that every civilization in the room had earned their seat not by being powerful or old or well-connected, but by being willing to show up and do the work honestly. Then he stopped talking, because he had said what he meant to say, and he had always believed that the best speeches ended before they wore out their welcome. The room was quiet for a moment. Then it was not quiet, because 17 delegations were all talking at once, and the sound was warm and alive and nothing like the sound of the old council hall. Far above all of it, in orbit, Una was already working. The Iron Meridian had been repositioned 2 days earlier to begin preliminary scans for the mapping mission. Una had not waited for the summit to finish. There was no reason to wait. The direction was already decided, and the instruments were already calibrated, and the dark between the stars did not care about paperwork. She sat at her console and watched the data come in, numbers and shapes and distances, the beginning of a picture that would take years to complete. She thought about how large it all was, not in a frightening way, in the way that a long road is large, full of distance, yes, but also full of everything that distance contains. She reached forward and marked the first coordinates. Then she leaned back in her chair, looked out the viewport at the deep black and the cold light of stars that no human had ever reached, and she smiled. There was a great deal of work to do. She was glad about that,